A billion-dollar company completely shut down, CEO in total panic, the best experts failing, and then a 12-year-old girl, the janitor's daughter, says, "I can fix it." Everyone laughed at her. No one imagined that she would save everything and destroy the real villain. Vertex Systems' skyscraper in London's Canary Wharf was an ocean of patterns. While the rest of the world saw a center of corporate power, 12-year-old Eleanor Clark saw the precise geometry of the glass panels, the predictable rhythm of the elevators rising and falling, and the way sunlight fragmented on the polished marble floor to create an ever-changing mosaic. Her autism did not isolate her from the world. On the contrary, it allowed her to perceive it on a different frequency, one in which logic, systems, and sequences were the primary language. The white noise of the air conditioning systems was a constant melody, and the barely audible hum of the servers one floor below was like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Clinging to her father Arthur's cleaning cart, she found an anchor of calm amidst the sensory maelstrom, a secure point of reference in her complex and beautifully ordered universe. Arthur Clark, a broad-shouldered man with work-hardened hands, saw a universe in his daughter. He had left his hometown of Sheffield in northern England after the collapse of the steel mills, bringing with him to London the hope of a future for his only child. His soft but distinctive northern accent stood out among the polished tones of the London elite. His job as a janitor at Global Vertex was more than a job. It was his promise to Eleanor. He watched her with a quiet, protective pride, understanding the extraordinary mind that lurked behind her still eyes. He was her interpreter, her rocking companion, the only one who knew that when Eleanor swayed gently, it was not from nervousness, but because she was processing the world at a speed that others could not keep up with. His greatest wish was for the world to see her genius. His greatest fear was what the world would do to her if it did. At the top of the food chain in that corporate ecosystem was Alistair Sinclair, the CEO, a man whose image appeared regularly in the Financial Times. Sinclair was the embodiment of old money power, low-key, immensely powerful, and removed from day-to-day operations. The real power, the technological power that drove this billion-dollar empire, lay with Damien Harding, the CTO. Damien was Sinclair's opposite. He was the product of London's new cutthroat meritocracy, suits made on Savile Row, a Swiss watch that cost as much as a car, and a voracious ambition that he barely concealed behind a veneer of corporate charm. He was the technical genius, the man who made the systems work, and he deeply resented having to report to a man he considered a relic of the past. The collision of these worlds happened on a Tuesday morning. Damien Harding and two other executives emerged from a conference room, their voices raised as they discussed a multi-million-pound merger. They passed Arthur, who was replacing a light bulb in a hallway, with little more than a condescending nod. Damien's gaze fell on Eleanor, who was sitting on a nearby bench swaying slightly as she neatly aligned a series of paper clips she had found. Damien paused for a moment, his face twisting into an expression of distaste. "Arthur," he said, his tone clipped, "the company has a policy about bringing distractions into the workplace. This is a professional environment." The word distractions hung in the air, a cruel euphemism for his daughter's presence, making it clear that to him she was an anomaly disrupting his perfect order. Damien Harding's mind was a cauldron of resentment. He saw Alistair Sinclair as a dinosaur, a man who had inherited power rather than earned it. He, Damien, was the true architect of Global Vertex's success. It was his algorithms, his security strategies, his vision that had kept the company ahead of its competitors, and yet it was Sinclair who received the plaudits, the astronomical bonuses, the respect. Envy gnawed at him for years until it turned into a plan, a bold, destructive plan. He would create a crisis so monumental, a system failure so catastrophic, that Sinclair's incompetence would become undeniable. The board would be forced to act, and he, Damien, the only one who could miraculously solve the problem, would be crowned the new king. The act of treason was executed with cold, digital precision. In the solitude of his luxury apartment overlooking the Thames, Damien opened his encrypted laptop. The virus he had been crafting over months was his masterpiece, an elegant and brutal algorithm designed to infiltrate the company's network and, at his command, sever its digital arteries. This would not be a crude attack. It would be a systemic shutdown, mimicking a cascading hardware failure that would be nearly impossible to diagnose. At 2 a.m., when the city was asleep and the company's systems were at their most vulnerable, He typed the final line of command. With a click, the plague was unleashed. He closed the laptop, poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey, and gazed out at the lights of London, feeling the power of a titan who had just brought down an empire with a single touch. The next morning began with its usual deceptive normality. The smell of strong coffee wafted through the offices, and the sound of keyboards provided the familiar soundtrack of productivity. At 9:15, a trader in the financial markets room frowned. His terminal, which processed thousands of pounds a second, had frozen. He rebooted it, muttering about the IT team. On the 35th floor, the head of the logistics department discovered that he could not access the shipping database. Small problems, isolated glitches, the normal friction of a giant corporate machine. No one connected the dots. No one saw the small cracks beginning to appear in the dam, the silent harbinger of the flood that was about to sweep everything away. At 9:22, the dam burst. What had been minor glitches became a full-blown systemic failure. A wave of digital darkness swept through the offices of Global Vertex Systems. Screens went black, one after another, in a silent, eerie cascade. Phone lines went dead. The servers, the beating heart of the company housed deep within the building, stopped humming, plunging the data center into deathly silence. Chaos erupted. Cries of, "I've lost everything and the system is down," echoed through the floors. The company, a living, breathing entity that breathed data and exhaled profits, suffered a sudden, violent cardiac arrest. It was paralyzed, blind, and mute, completely at the mercy of the crisis that had engulfed it. Alistair Sinclair felt the collapse like a physical pain. He was in the middle of a conference call with investors from Tokyo when all his screens went dark. His composure, legendary in London financial circles, shattered. He burst from his office, his face pale and his eyes wide with disbelief. "What is happening?" he shouted at the chaos on his floor. "I want answers. Now!" His personal cell phone began to vibrate violently. A barrage of calls from his board of directors, from financial regulators, from clients whose fortunes depended on the systems that were now dead. He, a man who ran a global empire, was reduced to a state of utter helplessness, screaming into a digital void that refused to respond. Damien Harding chose that moment to make his entrance. While others were running in panic, he walked with controlled urgency, his expression a mask of grave concern. He approached Sinclair, his voice calm but laden with false gravity. "Alistair, it appears we are experiencing a cascading hardware failure in our primary server cluster. The redundancy architecture appears to have collapsed. It's a 1 in a million failure scenario." He used technical jargon like a surgeon uses a scalpel, cutting through hope and heightening panic while positioning himself as the only person in the room who understood the scale of the problem. It was an Oscar-worthy performance, and Sinclair, in his shell-shocked state, believed every word. Away from the top-floor conference room, Eleanor felt the crisis differently. While Arthur tried to calm some panicked junior staff in one of the cafeterias, she sat motionless, staring into space. But she wasn't staring into space. In her mind, she was rewinding events, the hum of the servers that had changed frequency seconds before silence, the way the emergency lights had flashed in a specific sequence, 3 short, 1 long, 3 short, a Morse code for SOS. The pattern of failure on the screens wasn't random. It was symmetrical, spreading outward from a central point. To everyone else, it was chaos. To Eleanor, it was an equation, a malicious, deliberate equation. The system hadn't failed. It had been poisoned. Arthur saw his daughter in that focused, trance-like state and knew immediately what it meant. It was the same look she got when she put together a 5,000-piece puzzle or found a mistake in a math book. It was her brain working at a speed he couldn't comprehend. He knelt down beside her. "Ellie," he said softly, using her childhood nickname. "What is it, my love?" She didn't look at him. Instead, she picked up 7 sugar packets from the table and arranged them in a specific pattern. Then she picked up an 8th packet and placed it in the center, knocking all the others over in a chain reaction. "The center," she whispered, her first word in nearly an hour. "The problem is in the center." Arthur didn't understand the technology, but he understood the metaphor. She had found the source. The elite cybersecurity team, the Praetorian Guard, arrived within the hour. They were young, confident, dressed in matching black t-shirts, and exuded an arrogance that came from being the best at what they did. They set up shop in a large conference room, transforming it into a crisis command center with their laptops, portable screens, and a network of cables. Their leader, a man named Reese, addressed Sinclair with brisk confidence. "Don't worry, Alistair. We've dealt with worse. We'll dissect your system, find the cancer, and remove it. We'll have you up and running before the markets close." They were the cavalry, and everyone in the room felt a wave of relief. 3 hours later, relief had turned to despair. The Praetorian Guard's arrogance had been replaced by dark frustration. All their standard diagnostic tools were proving useless. The malicious code, which they now knew to be a virus, was a digital chameleon. It hid within legitimate system processes, changed its own signature every few minutes, and seemed to actively sabotage their attempts to isolate it. It was like fighting a ghost. "I've never seen anything like it," Reese admitted, his face tense. "This wasn't written by some hacker in a basement. This was created by someone with intimate knowledge of your architecture. Someone on the inside." The suspicion of sabotage was now officially in the air. Damian Harding played his role to perfection. He hovered over the teams of experts, offering suggestions that seemed helpful, but were actually dead ends. "Have you checked the integrity of the RAID controllers on the backup servers?" he would ask, knowing that this would lead them into an hours-long chase after a non-existent problem. It could be a firmware bug in the main network switch, he would suggest to another team. Each intervention was a masterpiece of misinformation, keeping the country's best brains busy chasing ghosts while he watched the clock, waiting for the right moment to present his miracle solution and claim his prize. On the other side of the glass, in a hallway, Eleanor watched the frenetic activity in the crisis room. The visual and audible chaos was overwhelming, but her mind filtered out the noise and focused on the data. She saw the diagrams on the whiteboards, the lines of code on the screens, and she saw the fundamental flaw in their approach. They were treating the symptoms, trying to fix the individual flaws in each part of the system. They weren't seeing the overall pattern. They weren't seeing that all the flaws emanated from a single point of origin, the sugar packet she had identified. The disorder, the broken logic of it all, caused her an almost physical pain. She felt a burning need to impose order, to fix the out-of-tune symphony. Arthur could see the agitation in his daughter. She was vibrating with pent-up energy, her hand tugging at his sleeve with increasing insistence. He knew what she wanted. She wanted to go into that room and show them. His protective instinct screamed at him to take her out of there, to protect her from certain humiliation. They would laugh at her, discard her. Damian had already done that. But then he looked into her eyes and saw a certainty so absolute, an understanding so deep, that his own doubt felt like a betrayal. How could he, who had always believed in her unique gift, be the one to stop her from using it? In that moment, his love for his daughter overcame his fear of the world. Heart hammering in his chest, he took Eleanor's hand and walked toward the entrance to the crisis room. This time he didn't address Sinclair, but the calmer, more intelligent-sounding specialist, Reese. "Excuse me, sir," Arthur said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I apologize for interrupting. I'm Arthur Clark, the caretaker." Reese looked at him, first with surprise, then with weary politeness. "Yes? My daughter Eleanor," Arthur continued. She sees things differently. She believes that you're all looking at the problem the wrong way. She says the problem isn't everywhere. It's in one place, in the center." Before Reese could respond, Damian Harding's icy voice cut through the air. He had overheard their conversation and had come closer like a viper. "Arthur, we've had this conversation," he said, his tone dangerously low. "Everyone's patience here is at its limit. The company is losing £10 million an hour, and you think this is the right time to entertain us with the fantasies of your eccentric daughter." The word eccentric was pronounced with a venom that made several people in the room feel uncomfortable. "Take her away from here. This is your final warning." The threat wasn't just to his job. It was a direct attack on Arthur's dignity and his daughter's identity. Damian's blatant cruelty had an unexpected result. Alistair Sinclair, who had been watching in silence, felt something shift inside him. His panic was giving way to cold rage. Damian's reaction was illogical. It was too defensive, too hostile. If a man were truly desperate to find a solution, he would listen to anyone, even a child. Unless, of course, that man didn't want the solution to be found. For the first time, Sinclair looked at his CTO and saw not a brilliant subordinate. He saw a man with something to hide. "Wait, Arthur," Sinclair said, his voice calm but charged with new authority. Everyone in the room, including Damien, turned to him in surprise. "Let the girl speak." Alistair Sinclair's command hung in the air, thick and heavy. Damien Harding froze, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He, the chief technology officer, was being silenced in favor of the janitor's daughter. The affront was so great that it left him momentarily speechless. The other specialists in the crisis room exchanged uncomfortable glances. This had gone from a technical crisis to a bizarre human drama. All eyes were now fixed on the small, quiet girl who had suddenly become the center of this universe of panic. Arthur placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder, his heart pounding with a mixture of terror and fierce pride. The fate of this billion-dollar company, and perhaps his daughter's future, now rested on what she did next. Eleanor didn't seem to notice the tension in the room. To her, Sinclair's order was simply permission to perform the next logical step in her analysis. She walked over to the large whiteboard that was covered in the expert's complex equations and useless network diagrams. Using an eraser, she cleared a large section in the center, creating a blank canvas. Then with a black marker, she began to draw. Her hand moved with hypnotic precision. She drew not with the hesitation of a child, but with the certainty of an architect. She recreated the system's data flow, the interconnections of the servers, the security protocols. And then, with a red marker, she sketched the virus's trajectory, a sharp, relentless line that exploited one specific vulnerability, then another, in perfect sequence. Reese, the leader of the Praetorian Guard, stepped closer to the board, his eyes following the red line with increasing intensity. His initial skepticism dissolved, replaced by an awe that bordered on awe. He wasn't looking at a drawing, he was looking at a crime map. "This is it," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "My God, this is it. We've been fighting the symptoms, but she found the pathogen." He turned to Sinclair, his eyes shining with new energy. "Alistair, you're right. This isn't a virus that's spread. It's a guided missile that's hit the heart of the system. We've been looking in the wrong place all along." The top expert's validation gave Eleanor instant, unquestionable credibility. As his authority evaporated, Damien Harding attempted one last desperate counterattack. "This is complete nonsense," he roared, his voice shrill. "We're basing our disaster recovery strategy on a child's drawing. A child who, let's face it, isn't normal. We need diagnostics, data, not scribbles. Sinclair, for God's sake, come to your senses." His attempt to use Eleanor's condition against her had been a gross miscalculation. The personal attack, rather than making him seem rational, had only made him seem cruel and desperate, cementing the suspicion that had already formed in Alistair's mind. Alistair Sinclair walked over to stand between Damien and Eleanor. He looked at his CTO with a coldness Damien had never seen before. "We've followed your advice for 9 hours, Damien, and those 9 hours have cost this company nearly £100 million and led us to a dead end." Then he turned to Eleanor, and his expression softened. He didn't see a quirky child. He saw a brilliant, focused mind. "My dear," he said gently, "what do you need to show us the way?" His bet was made. He had chosen his champion, and it wasn't the man in the Savile Row suit. Eleanor didn't speak. She just raised an arm and pointed to a small, unobtrusive monitoring screen in the corner of the room. It was a diagnostic terminal connected directly to the central file system, a system everyone had assumed was inaccessible. Her request was disarmingly simple. She didn't want access to the main network. She didn't want control of the servers. She just wanted to look at the file system's access logs. Reese nodded approvingly. "That's a brilliant approach," he told Sinclair. "She's not trying to fight the virus. She's trying to find the tracks of whoever released it." The logic of her request was so elegant that it silenced all remaining doubts in the room, except for Damien's, whose face was now pale with terror. They led her to the terminal. It was a simple workstation in a dusty corner of the room. Arthur pulled out a chair for her and stood behind her, his presence a silent wall of support. The moment her fingers touched the keyboard, the chaos of the crisis room disappeared from her awareness. Her world shrank to that 24-inch screen and the universe of data behind it. Her hyper-focus was so intense it was almost palpable. She wasn't hacking the system. She was conversing with it in her native language. She navigated directories and log files with intuitive speed. her eyes detecting millisecond anomalies that more sophisticated diagnostic programs had missed. It took 7 minutes. 7 minutes that felt like an eternity to everyone in the room. Suddenly, she stopped. She pointed to a single line of text on the screen. It was a log entry, timed at 2:03 a.m. It showed that a file had been uploaded to a temporary system directory from a specific remote access terminal. A terminal that Reese quickly verified from the logs belonged to Damien Harding, and the name of the file, left behind by the arrogance of its creator, was Regency Exe. Regency, Reese whispered, the code name for the restructuring project Damien proposed last month. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with horrifying clarity. The file is encrypted, Reese said. It could take hours, maybe days, to decipher it. But Eleanor shook her head. She glanced at the file name. Regency. Then she looked across the room at Damien, who was watching her with pure hatred. She thought of his arrogance, his need for superiority, his contempt for the Sinclair old guard. Her brain processed the variables, not like a computer, but like an observer of human nature. She turned to the keyboard and typed a single word. It was the Latin motto of the old, exclusive public school Damien had attended, a word he had once used at a meeting to show off. Invictus. Access granted. The file opened. The contents of the file scrolled across the screen like a scroll of betrayal. It was the complete source code for the virus, elegant and lethal. And there, in the comments, was the unmistakable digital signature. Project Regency V1.0, confidential, D. Harding. A collective gasp filled the room. The silence that followed was broken by Reese. Damien, he said, his voice devoid of emotion, you have the right to remain silent. The betrayal was laid bare for all to see. The architect of destruction had been unmasked, not by a team of experts but by his most despised victim. But the revelation wasn't over yet. As Reese studied the code with grudging admiration, he found something else. Alistair, he said, his voice now strained. There's a second payload, a wiper virus. It's set to activate in 12 hours. He explained the consequences, the total and permanent erasure of all company data, including backups. Damien wasn't just trying to seize control. He had a nuclear option to ensure that if he fell, he would take everyone with him. The enormity of his evil shocked the room more than the virus itself. He was willing to annihilate the lives of thousands of employees for the sake of his bruised ego. Damien Harding looked at the screen, then at the faces of his colleagues, and saw there was no way out. His mask of sophistication fell away, revealing the desperate, hateful man beneath. It's a lie, he shouted, his voice breaking. It's a trap. It was her. The little freak must have done this to frame me. His accusation was so absurd, so grotesque that no one believed it. It was the last roar of a cornered animal, blaming its own prey for the trap it had trapped itself into. His downfall was complete, not just professionally, but morally. Eleanor, who had remained silent, typed one last command. The screen split, now showing, next to the virus code, the contents of Damien's inbox. There were his secret communications with a competitor, negotiating the sale of Global Vertex's intellectual property, planning his future as CEO of his own company, built on the ashes of the one he was destroying. The proof was final. He was not just a traitor, he was a spy. The motive, the method, and the crime were all laid bare by the silent logic of a 12-year-old girl. Trapped and exposed, Damien lost the last vestige of control. With a scream of primal rage, he lunged toward Eleanor and the terminal, perhaps to destroy the computer, perhaps to hurt her. But he didn't get far. Reese and another specialist intercepted him, immobilizing him with surprising efficiency. As they dragged him from the room, he continued to shout insults, his venomous words echoing down the hallway, the last broadcast of a man whose own hatred had consumed and destroyed him. Decryption keys and knowledge of the virus provided by Eleanor, the Praetorian Guard team was able to neutralize the threat and begin restoring the systems in less than an hour. What would have been a billion-pound catastrophe had been averted. In the now silent crisis room, everyone stared at the quiet little girl sitting in front of the terminal. She looked small and frail, but everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed an act of heroism and genius that they would tell their grandchildren about. Alistair Sinclair approached Arthur and Eleanor. His face, once pale with panic, was now filled with an emotion he rarely showed: profound humility. He looked first at Arthur. "Mr. Clark," he said, his voice formal but filled with new respect. "I owe you an apology. The way you and your daughter were treated in this room was inexcusable. I was blinded by panic and prejudice." Then he slowly knelt down to Eleanor's eye level. "And to you, Eleanor, there are no words to express my gratitude. You saved this company." He extended his hand, not like a CEO, but like a man thanking another human being. The next day, Sinclair called a general meeting of all the company's London employees. He took the stage and told the whole story, without omitting his own failure to listen or Damien's cruelty. He talked about how the best-paid experts had failed, and how salvation had come from the most unexpected source. "We were saved," he told the hushed crowd, "by a brilliant mind that most of us, myself included, never bothered to notice." He asked Arthur and Eleanor to come on stage, and the audience erupted in a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. "In recognition of your character and dedication," Sinclair announced, "Arthur Clark is being promoted to facilities manager for the entire building, with a salary and benefits that reflect your importance to this company." Arthur was speechless, tears welling in his eyes. "In addition," Sinclair continued, "I am announcing the creation of the Clark Scholarship for Divergent Minds, a $1 million fund to support young neurodivergent people pursuing careers in science and technology." He turned to Eleanor. "And its first recipient with a full scholarship to any university in the world of her choice is Eleanor Clark herself, who will also join us as our youngest systems strategy consultant." As they left the building that night, the Clarks' lives had changed forever. They were no longer invisible. Executives who had once walked past them without seeing them now stopped to shake Arthur's hand and smile at Eleanor. She didn't respond verbally, but offered a small, rare smile in return. Her father walked beside her, not just as a janitor but as a respected manager, his posture taller, his stride more confident. He had not only achieved his dream of giving his daughter a future, she, with her unique gift, had given them both a future he had never dared to dream of. Later, in his small apartment, as London glittered outside, Arthur watched his daughter assemble a new, complex logic puzzle on the floor. The world saw her as a hero, a genius. He saw his Ellie, and he understood the true lesson of that day. Eleanor's condition, her different way of seeing the world, was not a limitation to be overcome. It was her strength. It was her superpower. Society, in its rush to label and categorize, had nearly wasted her gift. That day, the mind of an autistic girl didn't just save a company. It taught a small corner of the world that humanity's greatest potential often lies in those who dare to see the patterns in the chaos. She was just the janitor's daughter, the quiet girl no one saw in the hallways. Even saving a billion-dollar empire when the country's greatest experts failed seems unlikely, doesn't it? But what happened in that London skyscraper, in a crisis room on the brink of collapse, forever changed the lives of a powerful CEO, a humble father who never stopped believing, and a genius girl the world insisted on ignoring. If this story about the power of seeing the world differently touched your heart, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments which city you are following us from.